It was the winter of 1948, and Delhi was still carrying the wounds of partition. Streets were full of refugees. Camps stood crowded with families who had lost everything, and political leaders were struggling to keep the fragile peace intact. In the midst of this turbulence, Mahatma Gandhi continued his mission of reconciliation, fasting, and praying for communal harmony. But not everyone believed in his methods. Among those who opposed him most fiercely was Nathuram Godse, a man who once admired Gandhi but had grown to see him as the single greatest obstacle to what he believed was the security and dignity of Hindus in India. Godse had been influenced by Hindu nationalist ideology for years, and had once been connected with the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, RSS, and later the Hindu Mahasabha. He had worked closely with Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, a man whose revolutionary past and hardline political vision made him a key figure for many in the nationalist movement. While Gandhi spoke of love and forgiveness even for those who had committed violence, Godse felt that such generosity weakened the nation, especially after the horrors of partition. The tension between Gandhi's ideals and Godse's convictions grew sharply in January 1948 when the Indian government, following Gandhi's insistence, agreed to release 55 crore rupees to the newly formed Pakistan. To Gandhi, this was a moral and political necessity, a promise made and a gesture of goodwill to reduce hostility. To Godse, it was nothing less than betrayal. He saw it as aiding an enemy state that had already unleashed unspeakable violence against Hindus and Sikhs. In the weeks that followed, Godse's frustration turned into determination. He began meeting with a small group of associates: Narayan Apt, Vishnu Karkare, Gopal Godse, Madan Lal Pahwa, and a few others. They discussed ways to put an end to what they saw as Gandhi's dangerous influence. During this time, Godse and Apte visited Savarkar. The conversation that took place in that meeting would later become one of the most debated points in history. According to prosecution witness Digambar Baj, Savarkar gave his blessing with the words, "Yashasvi Hanya," be successful in return. In court, Savarkar denied ever giving such approval, claiming the meeting was about politics, not murder. The evidence against him remained circumstantial, and though suspicion lingered for decades, he was acquitted in 1949. On January 20th, 1948, the group made its first attempt. At Gandhi's daily prayer meeting at Birla House, a crude bomb was set off as a distraction while conspirators positioned themselves for the attack. The plan failed, Gandhi was unharmed, and the group slipped away. But the failed attempt did not deter them. It only made them more determined to succeed the next time. Over the next 10 days, Godse carried the burden of his decision with an almost eerie calm. He rehearsed in his mind the exact moment he would step forward, the words he would speak, and how he would aim the pistol. The weapon he chose was a Beretta, 38 caliber semi-automatic, reliable, deadly, and easy to conceal. On January 30th, 1948, Gandhi's schedule at Birla House ran late. At around 5:10 p.m., he emerged from his room, supported by his grandnieces Abha and Manu, walking slowly towards the prayer ground. His steps were unhurried, his face serene despite his frail health. Dozens of people lined the path to greet him, folding their hands, bowing in respect. Among them was Nathuram Godse, dressed in khaki trousers, a blue jacket, and holding a folded newspaper that concealed his pistol. As Gandhi approached, Godse stepped forward, brushing aside Abba and Manu. Folding his hands in a gesture of namaste, he bowed slightly, and then, without a pause, drew his pistol and fired 3 shots at point-blank range into Gandhi's chest and abdomen. The sound of gunfire tore through the evening air. Gandhi gasped the words, "Hey, Ram," and collapsed to the ground. The crowd erupted in panic. Some froze in shock, others screamed, and a few rushed to overpower gods. He made no attempt to flee, allowing himself to be caught, the gun still in his hand. Gandhi's frail body was carried inside Birla House, but it was too late. Within minutes, the news spread across Delhi, and soon, around the world. Mahatma Gandhi was dead. As Gandhi's body lay still inside Birla House, the people outside were in disbelief. Some wept openly. Some clung to each other in shock, and others simply stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. The man who had led India's freedom struggle with nothing but truth and nonviolence was gone, taken by bullets fired not by a foreign enemy, but by a fellow Indian. Police officers quickly took Nathuram Godse into custody. He appeared calm, almost relieved, as if a long-awaited task had been completed. Witnesses described him as unflinching, speaking clearly and without remorse when questioned. He claimed that he had acted out of duty, a duty, he believed, to protect the nation from Gandhi's policies. His voice was steady as he told his captors that Gandhi's insistence on accommodating Muslims and pressuring the government to release funds to Pakistan would ultimately destroy India. By the next morning, news of the assassination had spread like wildfire. Across the country, people poured into the streets to mourn. Shops closed, offices shut down, and an air of grief mixed with anger swept through cities and villages. In some places, mobs turned their rage towards those associated with Hindu nationalist groups, attacking their offices and members. The government moved swiftly. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru addressed the nation in a trembling voice, telling the people that the light has gone out of our lives and there is darkness everywhere. His words captured the mood of a nation in mourning. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, India's deputy prime minister, took charge of maintaining order, ordering the arrest of key suspects in the conspiracy. Investigations revealed the careful planning behind the assassination. Testimonies placed Godse and Narayan Apt at Savarkar's residence just days before the murder. Witness Digambar Baj, who had turned approver, claimed he had heard Savarkar urging them to succeed. However, much of the evidence was circumstantial. While Godse openly admitted to the shooting, he never directly implicated Savarkar during his trial. The trial began in May 1948 at the Special Court in Red Fort, Delhi. The prosecution laid out its case in painstaking detail: the meetings, the failed January 20th attempt, the procurement of the pistol, and the final execution of the plan on January 30th. Godse, acting with legal counsel, delivered a statement that stunned many in the courtroom. He spoke for hours, explaining his ideology, his grievances against Gandhi, and why he felt compelled to act. He accused Gandhi of weakening India by encouraging reconciliation with Muslims even after the bloodshed of partition. He argued that Gandhi's fasts and moral pressure on the government to favor Pakistan undermined national strength. For Godse, it was a matter of principle he saw Gandhi's influence as fatal to India's survival. Yet, outside the courtroom, the vast majority of Indians saw his act not as principled, but as a cruel betrayal. To them, Gandhi was not just a political leader but a moral compass, someone whose message of truth and non-violence had inspired millions. Killing him was not only a personal attack, but an assault on the very ideals of the new nation. Throughout the trial, Savarkar maintained his innocence. His defense pointed out that the prosecution lacked direct evidence tying him to the plot. While some of his speeches and writings aligned ideologically with Godse's views, there was nothing concrete to prove his involvement in the assassination. In February 1949, the court acquitted him of all charges, but the shadow of suspicion would follow him for the rest of his life, debated endlessly by historians and political thinkers. For Godse and Apt, however, the verdict was clear. Both were found guilty of murder and conspiracy and sentenced to death. Several others in the group received prison sentences. Appeals were filed, but the death sentences were upheld. On November 15th, 1949, in Ambala Central Jail, Nathuram Godse and Narayan Apt were executed by hanging. Godse went to the gallows reportedly without fear, carrying a copy of the Bhagavad Gita. His final words, according to witnesses, reflected pride in his act, even though history would forever remember him as Gandhi's assassin. The assassination of Mahatma Gandhi did not just take the life of a leader, it shook the very soul of the newly independent nation. The country was barely 6 months into its freedom, still fragile from the trauma of partition, and the loss of its most influential moral voice left millions feeling orphaned. The immediate aftermath was one of chaos and grief. In Delhi, hundreds of thousands joined the funeral procession. Gandhi's body was placed on a simple wooden platform, draped in khadi cloth, and carried through the streets on a military vehicle converted into a hearse. The air was filled with chants of Mahatma Gandhi Ki Jai and Hey Ram, the words believed to be his last. People wept openly, some throwing flowers along the path, others walking barefoot for miles in homage. The procession stretched for hours until it reached the banks of the Yamuna, where Gandhi was cremated according to Hindu rites. Around the country, the mood was heavy with sorrow but also with tension. The government feared that the assassination might spark communal violence, especially since the killer was a Hindu nationalist and Gandhi had been seen as a protector of Muslims. In several cities, offices of the Hindu Mahasabha and the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, RSS, were attacked, and their members were targeted by angry mobs. The RSS was temporarily banned, with the government citing its extremist influence, though it denied direct involvement in the killing. The political impact was far-reaching. Gandhi had been a moral check on the more hardline tendencies within the leadership. With him gone, decisions on national integration, refugee settlement, and the handling of Pakistan took a different tone. While leaders like Nehru and Patel continued to speak of unity, the absence of Gandhi's personal influence made it harder to rally the nation's conscience during difficult times. The trial of Nathuram Godse and his co-accused became one of the most closely followed legal proceedings in India's history. Newspapers published every detail, and debates erupted in homes, universities, and political circles. There were a few who sympathized with Godse's arguments, if not his method, but the overwhelming sentiment was condemnation. Godse's statement to the court was later banned from public circulation by the Indian government for decades, fearing it could inspire extremist thought. In it, he claimed that his act was not out of hatred for Gandhi as a person, but opposition to his policies. He portrayed himself as a patriot, acting to save India from what he saw as self-destructive ideals. Yet, to the majority, his justification only deepened the tragedy, a stark reminder that ideological extremism can twist even patriotism into violence. Vinayak Damodar Savarkar's role remained the most controversial. Though acquitted for lack of evidence, his name was forever linked to the conspiracy in public perception. Historians would continue to debate whether he actively encouraged gods or merely inspired him through ideology. In later years, documents and testimonies emerged that kept the question alive, but none offered irrefutable proof. Over time, the memory of January 30th, 1948 became a national day of mourning, observed as Martyrs' Day in India. Schools, government offices, and institutions pause for 2 minutes of silence to honor Gandhi and all who sacrificed their lives for the nation. Yet, every year, the day also sparks renewed debates about the causes and consequences of the assassination. In the decades that followed, books, plays, and films revisited the event, each offering different perspectives. Some portrayed Godse as a misguided fanatic. Others tried to understand his fears about national security. Savarkar, too, became a polarizing figure hailed by some as a revolutionary hero, condemned by others as a symbol of hardline politics. The assassination left behind lessons that continue to resonate. It showed how a single act of violence can alter the course of history, not just by removing a leader, but by changing the tone of a nation's journey. It exposed the dangers of ideological intolerance, where disagreement turns into dehumanization, and debate gives way to the gun. For Gandhi's followers, his death was not the end of his message. They sought to carry forward his ideals of nonviolence, truth, and reconciliation, believing that the best way to honor him was to live by the principles he had lived and died for. Across the world, Gandhi's image as a champion of peace only grew stronger in the years after his assassination. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, and others drew inspiration from him, proving that while bullets could silence his voice, they could not kill his ideas. And so, the story of January 30th, 1948, remains one of India's most painful yet defining chapters, a moment when the nation stood at the crossroads of grief and resilience, loss and legacy. Gandhi's death, brought about by the hand of a fellow Indian, continues to serve as both a warning and a reminder that the freedom and unity of a nation must be protected not only from outside threats, but from the divisions that can grow within.